This is ContraZoom.
Where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Jeff Bull.
One thing we like to do on this podcast is celebrate cinematic milestones. In the past, we have discussed the 80th anniversary of Casablanca on episode 218, Dr. No at 60 years on episode 236, The Red Shoe's 75th birthday on episode 260, and most recently, the 70th anniversary of Seven Samurai on episode 260. Today, we are looking at another film that is celebrating its 75th year of release, and that is Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon. Joining Jeff and I today is Martin Strange. He is the host of the Filmsplaining with Martin Strange podcast, and he also has an incredibly popular YouTube channel where he does movie reviews, film essays, and gives viewers a peek into his physical media collection. I was on the Filmsplaining podcast a few months ago on episode 304, where we talked about the Scott Pilgrim universe. So welcome back to the show, Martin. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
Of course, yeah. We were talking a little bit just before we hit record about the upcoming Toronto International Film Festival, which you're coming for. And I'm very excited because we talked so much about Toronto on your episode. So I hope that the things that we talked about you can sort of see in person and get the world that Edgar Wright and Scott Pilgrim were building in the movie. And then, of course, the animated series afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting because we're all going to be so busy trying to catch every possible movie that we can. So I'm wanting to get the Toronto experience, but I'm just not sure how much of it I'll be able to fit in. But I'm eagerly anticipating some great food, some kind people, which we don't have where I'm at in the world. And yeah, I'm very excited for TIFF. It's my first really big major festival.
Nice. Well, I really hope that you can carve out maybe an afternoon or an evening or something like that and maybe do a little bit of sightseeing so that way you can feel like you're also getting a vacation in as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's going to be a home away from home for about a week or so.
And what's really nice, I'm sure you already know this. I have not, unfortunately, listened to your Scott Pilgrim discussion yet, but I'm sure you know this, having watched all of it for that. The theater from the last episode of the new animated series is where they do Midnight Madness. So check out at least one Midnight Madness show. You'll be in that theater.
Yeah. There was one I think I added to my list. I can't recall which one it is though. I've been poring over these spreadsheets for the last several days because I'm trying to coordinate with another fellow podcaster friend of mine who I'm staying with. We're going to be seeing a lot of stuff together. So it's a lot of movies, man. It's a lot.
Yeah, and of course, if you're running behind or anything like that, just call up Guillermo del Toro. He's got a key to the city, so he can get you into any building you want.
That's right. Me and my old pal Guillermo.
Jeff, we just finished covering the Fantasia Festival, where you wrote a ton of excellent reviews. Before we get into our discussion today, briefly, I just want to know how that festival was for you this year.
It was really fun. I covered it remotely, and I was very happy to be able to do that. And I think this year, for people who were covering it remotely, they had a record number of films available for remote access, so screeners, which is really nice. So, shout outs to everyone at Fantasia Film Festival who would put up with my constant screener requests. And I am very happy with most of the reviews that I put out of that. I think normally when I am doing a festival, my quota is I got to hit at least 3 reviews. And I think for Fantasia, I had 10.
Yeah.
Which is, way more than I'm used to.
Mm-hmm.
But, beyond that, I'm also not usually proud of all the reviews that I write. Usually they're there's at least 1 or 2 that are it's whatever. I really like most of my Fantasia reviews. So anyone who hasn't read all of them, go check them out on contrazoonpod.com. There's some good ones there.
You're far too self-deprecating. Your reviews are all excellent. And you also did a podcast where you discussed the 2 opening night films, which, Eddington and, I'm sorry, what was the other one again, Jeff?
The Smurfs.
Yes. The Smurfs.
That was a fun double feature. The Smurfs and then Eddington.
Yeah.
I think we did it in the right order too, because I think it's very easy to go from the Smurfs into Eddington. Eddington is one I wanted to sit with for at least a little bit. So,
can I ask you, Jeff, what was your favorite thing you saw at that festival, and why was it the Smurfs?
I mean, the Smurf. Okay, so being entirely serious, the Smurfs was not my favorite thing I saw at that festival,
Sure.
but I did like it way more than apparently is the norm.
Mm.
I thought it was really cute, and I thought that it like actually I felt a passion for the original source material in that. Though I will caveat that by saying I'm not a big Smurfs comic fan reader or like comic reader. But to me, it seemed like the people who made that film were. And
Well,
so,
that's good, at least.
yeah, I am going to be a Smurfs defender for this year, despite that being apparently an unpopular opinion. My favorite thing I saw at Fantasia Film Festival was All You Need Is Kill, which you can read my review of on conversionpod.com.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone that doesn't know, that is another adaptation of the anime that was eventually became Edge of Tomorrow, the Tom Cruise film.
Yeah.
I'm just going to correct you there. It's a novel.
Novel,
original.
sorry, not graphic novel, just novel.
Might be a visual novel, but it is like it is words.
I know there is a manga in there somewhere. I'm not sure if that's the original source material, but yeah.
The original is the visual novel, which was then adapted into a manga and a movie and this other movie as well.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you are very, very familiar with the source material or any of the adaptations, the new movie, All You Need Is Kill, puts a really interesting spin on it that I think all it does, and actually this is kind of relevant to Rashomon, all it does is present the same story from a different perspective, and it is wildly different just by doing that.
Yeah, you noted that in your review too, I believe, and it definitely makes me want to check out that film. It's high on my list for sure.
Definite recommend when it hopefully comes to theaters this year, but it's hard to say because I mean it's G Kids, which has very interesting rollouts in North America, and I mean a Japanese film which sometimes just kind of the rollouts for Japanese films over here can be unusual, I'll say.
Yeah, that's true.
これわかんねえ。人の心が信じられなくなりそうだ。そんなことが言えねえのが人間だ。人間ってやつは自分自身にさえ白状しないことはたくさんある。
All right, well, let us get into our topic at hand today. Akira Kurosawa began production of Rashomon back in 1948 at his usual home Toho Studios, but they decided it was too much of a financial risk and backed out. 2 years later, rival studio Daiei Films picked up the production and they resumed filming. It was shot over the course of a month, and post-production took only a mind-blowing 1 week, with the film having its premiere only 8 days after photography wrapped on August 25th, 1950. You heard me right. 8 days after filming was completed, this film premiered, which is crazy. I know.
Wow.
The film was a modest hit at the box office, becoming Daiei's 4th highest grossing film of the year, but the international community took note of its experimental nature and accolades came pouring in. It won the Golden Lion, which was the top prize at the Venice Film Festival, and it was awarded the Best Foreign Film at the Oscars, among many other recognitions. The film tells the story of two men who are telling the story of a trial that occurred to another man as the three of them seek shelter during a rainstorm in the city of Rashomon. There was an incident where a bandit spots a samurai and his beautiful wife, and being so enthralled with her, the bandit kills the samurai and assaults the wife before she runs away. At the trial, we get the events told to us from 4 different perspectives. First, the woodcutter who found the body testifies what little he saw before and after the incident, setting the stage up for the baseline details that all the other testimonies will build upon. Second up was Tajumiro, the bandit, who after tricking the ceremony, he ties him up. He tries to assault the wife, but instead says that she falls for him and in her shame, tells the men that they must fight to the death for her honor, while the winner keeping her as their wife. An epic sword fight occurs, with Tajumiro winning, but the wife has run away in this time. The third version comes from the wife, who, after being found by the police, says that her husband witnessed her assault and is so ashamed of his wife that he won't even look at her. After fainting, she wakes up to find her husband dead, where she runs away and tries to kill herself, where she is then found. Lastly, a Shinto medium comes and conjures the spirit of the dead samurai to give testimony. We hear the ghostly voice of the samurai from beyond the grave, as he says Tajumiro assaulted his wife, then afterwards asks her to marry him. When she accepts, Tajumiro, who previously was attracted to her fierceness, is now disgusted and asks the samurai if he should kill the wife or let her go. She manages to run away, and in his shame, the samurai kills himself with a dagger. We don't find out the outcome of the trial, but the woodcutter is recounting this story. He lets it slip out that he actually saw the whole thing and purposely lied to the police to save himself from getting into trouble. He claims that after the assault, Tajumiro begged the wife to marry him and she refuses. But the samurai, I don't know why I keep saying ceremony, but the samurai, now believing that his wife is damaged goods, wants nothing to do with her. Eventually, the bandit and the samurai get into a fight, but instead of the heroic sword fight battle Tajumiro described, instead is a sloppy, uncoordinated one where neither combatant lands a hit and they fall over themselves. Eventually, Tajumiro ends up killing the samurai, but the wife has already run away. This version of events seems like the closest to reality, but it still comes through the lens of personal bias and interpretation. The film stars Kurosawa regulars like Toshiro Mifune, Takashi Shimura, Machiko Kiyo, Masuki Mori, and more. The film, which was based on a short story that follows the same structure, is now known as the Rashomon effect, where movies take different perspectives of characters to establish the thinness of truth in reality. Other popular works that use this narrative include Ridley Scott's The Last Duel, TV shows like Star Trek, How I Met Your Mother, The X-Files, and more. Before we get into the film, I'd love to start with everyone's personal history of the movie and where it sits in Kurosawa's filmography for you. Let's start with you, Martin. When did you first watch Rashomon, and what is your relation to it in Kurosawa's other works?
So I am ashamedly quite late to the game in discovering Kurosawa's filmography. He's someone who has been on the periphery of my tastes and my sensibilities for a long time, many years, but it's taken me a long time to really catch up with several of the films, especially the notable ones. So the first time I saw this film was only a year and a half ago. And since I've watched maybe 3 or 4 others. Before that, I had seen Hidden Fortress, I think, which I really liked. I just watched Throne of Blood, which is kind of my current favorite. But as I said, I'm kind of a novice when it comes to Kurosawa. He's been one of my largest filmic blind spots for quite a while now. But every time I watch a film of his, I'm consistently blown away by what he's able to achieve on screen. And the sheer kind of invention of what he's doing with not only with the camera, but with narrative, especially in this movie. I mean, it seems, you mentioned the Rashomon effect. It seems like this movie kind of births its own subgenre. We see this playing out, and I noted this too. It's almost always crime films, which is really interesting, and maybe it's something we can throw up in the air for discussion. But I would be interested to see this narrative framework, used on a different genre of film and what that might look like. But yeah, I mean, watching it again this time, I picked out so many details that I think were lost on me the first time. The first time you're kind of just along for the ride and going with each individual story, trying to figure out who is right and if they're all lying or if any of them are lying. And on rewatch, like with all of his films that I've seen thus far, there are all these beautiful little details that you pick up on.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. This was my second time watching it, but before I talk about it myself, Jeff, what about you? Had you seen this film before, and what's sort of your history with Kurosawa's works?
Well, I have to echo a lot of what Martin just said. I am kind of late to the game on Kurosawa. He's someone that I've definitely known about and known, at least vague synopses of Kurosawa films for years. But I only really seriously started watching any of his filmography. I want to say back in 2020 when on my podcast, Classic Movies Live, we did an episode on Yojimbo. I think that was the first time I'd actually watched a Kurosawa film. So the first time I watched Rashomon was also probably about a year and a half ago, maybe as many as 2 years ago. And I haven't watched all of his filmography. Rashomon is not my favorite of his, but I'd put it probably near the middle. But what I really noticed watching it, I rewatched it for this podcast, and I also watched an American remake from about 10 years later called The Outrage right afterwards. And I think that really helped to sort of solidify my opinions on this because, back in the day, I used to listen to a lot of metal music. And one thing that I had never liked about Motorhead is like he's got this gruff voice. It kind of sounds like like the voice that everyone else is always doing. And I told that to my dad once, and he's like, yeah, that's because he invented the voice.
Yeah, so
that's because everyone else is trying to be Lemmy. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And I think that was sort of my impression of Rashomon the first time I saw it. It's like, well, I've seen this a million times before because everyone does Rashomon, not the other way around. And I think that like seeing it in close proximity with someone else trying to remake it really helped me to appreciate a lot of the things that I'm sure we'll talk about in this episode a lot more about this movie.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And it's sort of something I was going to also say in response to Martin's comments too, where I feel like Kurosawa, for a lot of people getting into film, it can be very intimidating, especially when you're starting to venture out of non-English language films and you're looking at movies that are now 75 plus years old, specifically in regards to his work. And it could be a daunting experience if you're trying to further your film education. And every time I watch a Kurosawa film, I am reminded just how much of and I don't mean this in a derogatory way at all, a populist director he is. His films are exciting, they're enthralling, they're funny, they can be scary, they have great action sequences. Like anything that you want from a good popcorn film, Kurosawa does it and does it better than just about anyone else. He's almost sort of like a precursor to someone like Steven Spielberg in that regards, where you kind of forget how much talent is there because you're so entertained by the films. And every time I watch a Kurosawa film, I feel that way. I think of something specifically about Seven Samurai. I celebrated its anniversary last year, and it's a 3-hour film. And every time I watch it, I forget how long it is because it is so exciting from start to finish. It is one of the best action films ever made. And that's a testament to Kurosawa that he can make an over 3-hour film feel that brisk.
Yeah.
For me, this is the second time I have watched this film. About 5 years ago or so, when I finally decided to start digging into Kurosawa's work, I watched a lot of his bigger films. So I think I've only seen about 6 or so, and I have a whole bunch more to go through because he has a very long and wide-ranging filmography where...
That's the thing, man. He's made so many movies, and when you're just starting, you're kind of like, where do I start? Do I start chronologically? Do I start with the highest rated one, because he's also a director who has had many phases of his career. He didn't stick to one thing for the entirety of his filmography. He made dramas, he made action epics, he made war movies, he made very quiet, weird kind of almost horror movies, so it's getting in there and figuring out, well, how do I, what do I find that's going to give me the most Kurosawa kind of thing. I think this is honestly would be a great one to start with for people who were looking to dive in.
Yeah, he's known as the samurai director, but like very few of his films are actually samurai based. Most of his biggest ones are, but not all of them are. A series I do here frequently on the podcast is one called Make Remake, where I look at an original and a remake. And just now, a remake of one of his films is in theaters. Spike Lee's Highest to Lowest is a remake of High and Low, which is at the time when it came out, a modern crime thriller about a high-powered executive whose kid gets kidnapped, and he has to figure out how to get his kid back. It's a very simple story. It's not this, crazy period piece samurai thing that a lot of what he's known for, people think of when they think of Akira Kurosawa. So
coincidentally, a film that I will be covering on the next season of my show.
Ooh, very exciting! I'm excited to hear that one.
We're
Then
gonna do High and Low.
Yes.
Yeah.
So all of us had previously seen Rashomon, so it's nice that we were able to kind of revisit here. I will also say, in terms of the ones that I have seen, it is not my favorite. I'm with you, Martin. Throne of Blood is probably my favorite. For anyone who doesn't know that one, it's a Macbeth adaptation, and holy hell, is that movie ever good?
Yeah. It's so thrilling. I mean, from start to finish, and he does a lot of these kinds of tricks in this film as well. Throne of Blood's a little later. It's 57, right? I think. So he had been honing his craft for a long time at that point. But there are so many visual tricks that he pulls that really, when you kind of sit down and study them, are like how is this happening? How is this on screen right now? In 1957. And he does a lot of that kind of stuff here too. I noted when I was watching this just how beautifully the way that certain characters are moving through a frame, and you can get that kind of like really nice refraction of the lens behind in the trees. So everything feels kind of like a little hazy and a little uneasy, which of course lends itself to the story anyway. There's so much of that stuff to pick up on.
And to go along with my sort of populist sentiment, I've seen 6 of his films, and all 6 of these films have been remade by other people. Obviously, Throne of Blood is already an adaptation of previous works, but still, many people have done Macbeth versions after this. But like Seven Samurai became The Magnificent Seven. Ikiru became Living, which only came out a couple years ago. Rashomon, Jeff, you were talking about the remake there. Yojimbo became A Fistful of Dollars. And then The Hidden Fortress was the primary inspiration for George Lucas in making Star Wars. You watch that and it's literally beat for beat what A New Hope is.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, this was one of the reasons it's very nice to have a podcast, because I think not all the times that I've watched Akira Kurosawa films, but most of the times that I've watched Akira Kurosawa films have been specifically to cover them in a make remakes kind of format for my podcast. We talked about Yojimbo, which was a stealth episode for A Fistful of Dollars. We talked about The Hidden Fortress and Star Wars. I think that's it, actually. It's the only 2. But, you start with one, and now this is a director that you're interested in and want to actually put in the work to watch.
Well, I think what's so amazing, too, about that is the reach that he had on the world, on world cinema. You have Italian directors remaking his movies. You have American and English directors remaking his movies. It's the sign of any great master that even at that time, his reach was so far. When you listen to guys like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg talk about their favorite movies, they're often mentioning Kurosawa movies along with Bergman and Fellini and all of those people. But Kurosawa is kind of the first guy that most of these filmmakers recognize as their primary inspiration, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also got we're obviously talking from a Hollywood perspective here. He's had a significant impact on Bollywood and Indian cinema too. If you look at even just the Wikipedia list of remakes of Kurosawa films, a good chunk of them are from the Indian subcontinent, which that's the directors that are very influential in Western cinema aren't necessarily the same directors that are always influential in Indian cinema. So I think that's, just as impressive.
Right.
One thing that I noticed with this, the way the film starts out with, it's this torrential rain pour, and the first thing that makes me think of it is Seven Samurai, obviously, and how I feel no one shoots rain like Kurosawa does. It comes down so thick and so heavy that it almost takes you out of the movie while you're watching it, and you think about how they filmed this. I know he used rain towers. He was a big fan of rain towers, and using black and white film, you would often have to dye the water so that way it would show up better on screen. And it just sort of takes me, I'll be like, man, how cold must the actors have been? How wet were the crew? What were they doing to protect the camera from getting wet? All the sort of things that like are going through your head as you're watching this, like the most impressive rain sequence you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, and the sound of it
Yeah.
too. The sound of the rain in that, especially in that opening sequence, is so strong and so powerful. Even a character calls attention to it. He says, "I'd rather sit here and listen to the rain." You know, and starting a movie like that is really a bold move, because you're not sure if the audience is going to follow along. You know, starting with this, you're just out in the elements. But it works, and it immediately, I think that it gets, gets the story started in a way that, I guess hits the ground running is the phrase I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's always super impressive the way they can capture that, and it does really set the tone there because you feel like you are trapped there with these ostensibly surrogates for the audience, where this woodcutter and a priest are the two people that witness this trial, and they are the ones that are telling it to the audience, which is us, in the form of another man who is I guess he's another bandit who is stuck there having to listen to this story and having to decide whether or not he's interested in hearing their version of events or not.
Mm-hmm. He's the only kind of completely non-biased character in the film. He's the only like real outside line, you know.
Mm-hmm. But then, yeah, it's basically, it's one of those things where I didn't even realize until I was looking it up afterwards, where there's only 3 sets to this film. We've got this, sitting under the gates of the city where they're waiting for this rainstorm to pass. They've got this forest set that the event takes place. And then they also have this police station / courtroom sort of set up where all we see is this blank white wall behind the people that are testifying. We never even see the camera turn around to see who they're testifying to. Is this one person they're talking to? Are they talking to an entire jury worth of people? Is this a community event where people are able to witness it, like a courtroom setting? I don't know. Like this is so minimalistic, but like you don't even think about that while you're watching it.
Yeah, you know what I thought this time watching it? I thought, what if they're not talking to anybody? What if there's no one on the other side? And this is all, a kind of wild thought experiment or something. Because, yeah, you never hear from the tribunal. They do this really interesting thing where the characters will they'll say the questions that they're being asked so that the audience can fill in the gaps of like, okay, what's actually transpiring. But yeah, I immediately it's just like so theatrical, and the choice to not even see, the tribunal there.
I mean, very clearly, us as viewers, we are the judge. We are the judge and jury of this case, because after we hear all the different versions, we are the ones that must come to the conclusion: who do we believe? Who had the correct story? Who is guilty? What crime actually took place? All these questions, we are the ones that are responsible for finishing the movie and deciding what we think happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then so we sort of get this baseline, and we understand that the way the story starts is we get this one woodcutter who sees the samurai and his wife come in, and he sees the bandit hiding in the woods, and then we sort of know that no matter what, this is where the story starts. Something happens where he manages to convince the samurai to follow him into the woods, where the event then takes place. And then finally, we know that one person is dead, one person has run away, and one person is caught by the police. And that's sort of the baseline details. It sort of seems like that is inarguable. This has happened. Everything else seems to be up for debate. Jeff, I'd like to start with you in terms of like, how did you feel watching the different versions of the stories? In what ways did they help build on each other, and maybe what ways did they make each other less believable?
Well, I mean, they build on each other very well, because like they just portray the exact same events. So I think Akira Kurosawa has a pretty good grasp of I think that Akira Kurosawa has a pretty good grasp himself of what happened, but is very, very good at not letting the audience know in such a way that there's never any doubt. I don't know if that makes sense. But like I think what I found most interesting is that in each of the stories, each of the stories obviously are told in a way that makes whoever is telling them look the best, whether that be, look the most honorable they possibly can, or, look like the good guy. None of them ever really look like the good guy, even in their own stories. But I think what's most interesting to me is, in telling the story in the way that makes them look the best, every single one of them did the murder in their own story.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
in what's his name again? Toshiro Mifune plays Tajomaru. In Tajomaru's story, he's the guy that does the murder. In Takehiro's story, he kills himself. In Masago's story, she kills her husband. And I think it's really interesting that every single one of them, in making themselves look as good as possible, did the murder.
Mm-hmm. Well, they present it as this thing that was like inescapable, right? Like like Toshiro Mifune says, I had to kill him. They each of them kind of are relating this idea that the death of this samurai is unavoidable at all costs in this situation entirely.
Mhm.
And so immediately with each story, it feels like you're already kind of, I mean, actually from the very beginning, you're kind of thrust into this is an unreliable narrator, right? Which is one of the best and most fun conventions of storytelling that there can be, because the audience is then allowed to interpret it in any way. And the killer character ostensibly is just immediately through his actions, through the way he's like cackling. He has this manic energy, and seems to be wrestling with some real demons inside of him, and is just immediately reveals himself to be a horrible person, and is not shy at all about it. And then you have a kind of a similar thing going on with the other two, only they kind of the woman is sort of she's trying to kind of appeal, I think, to um sensibilities that obviously we're still seeing this kind of thing happen all the time now, right? Even today. Um, and I think I'm glad that you mentioned The Last Duel, Dakota, because I think that's a very slept on movie that not a lot of people saw, that uses this technique to great effect. But yeah, each of them are trying to be the hero of their own story, but also none of them are afraid um, to reveal, so much about what they are individually doing that is clearly wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. I think there's two things there that you hit on that I really want to sort of go a little bit deeper into. The first, obviously, is you say unreliable narrator, and that's obviously the main thing. Unreliable narrator, in, I guess we'll call it the Rashomon effect, are basically sort of like sister genres, in the sense of this is clearly an unreliable narrator movie, but so specifically done from multiple narrators to the point that its entire purpose is to confuse the audience, like what happens in The Last Duel, where we're left to decide what's going on. Whereas an unreliable narrator, usually that's a genre where either partway through or in the conclusion, we realize that they were not telling the truth the whole time. So everything we think we know has been a lie the whole time. And that's obviously a much deeper and broader genre where there's so many, like the first thing that comes to my head is something like Fight Club. I'm sure we can all rattle off a whole bunch of unreliable narrator movies, Usual Suspects, things like that.
Tons of them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then this is sort of like a subgenre of that, where we're getting multiple unreliable narrators, sort of taking it at a different way. Because oftentimes when you get a second unreliable narrator in a story, it's usually for a much shorter period of time, much more condensed period of time. Whereas this is the whole runtime.
Right. And it's meant to typically it's meant to kind of pay off something, right? You're meant to find out the truth at the end.
Yeah.
And it's like, this movie is really interesting because we ostensibly find out the truth at the end, but do we really? You know, even the woodcutter himself has proven to be a liar, you know, saying it's human to lie and things like that. So there's this endless cycle of untruth and who do you believe? Is anyone can you believe anyone? Right? It's there's this deep question at the bottom of this movie of like, can any of these people be good people? Can they tell the truth? Can they be morally just? Right?
And I mean, it does make you wonder with each of these stories, like if the events of the case are so inevitable that, you know, as you were saying earlier, Martin, you know, they present it not just as the samurai died, but he had to die.
Mhm.
Like, you know, Tanjiro had to kill him. Masago saw no other choice but to kill him. He himself decided he must kill himself because he can't continue after that.
Yeah.
If all of the facts of this case are so inevitable, then, you know, you start to think, as I'm watching this, I was starting to think, you know, what's even the point
Right.
of lying about this? What are they gaining from it?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the first time I watched this, there was no question in my mind that the final story, the woodcutter's version, where he kind of just presents everyone as pathetic, is that just must be the truth. And then when I watch it this time, I'm like, wait a minute, what's he getting at here?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, the one thing that he keeps harping on is that there was no knife. And at the very end, if I'm not mistaken, he's revealed to have the knife. So it's not like he did the murder, probably, but what is he saying here that lets him come out of this whole event having this very valuable knife?
Yeah, and also, like, what led him to not, you know, exposing all of this in the first place? What was he so afraid of? He's clearly a very conflicted man, especially by the end of it. You know, we see him like really wrestling with this decision. He says, "I don't understand my own soul." You know, this is a man in peril, so we can't exactly trust that his word could be the final word.
Right.
And then sort of the other thing that I want to bring up that connected to something that you were saying, Martin, and also you too, Jeff, as well. This idea that in each of these stories, they are the killer, where, you know, you'd expect in a story like this where the bandit, when he tells the story, he's gonna be like, oh, yes, you know, I was going to kill him, but then I didn't. Why would he admit to that crime? Because you would think, you know, we're in feudal Japan. I don't know what the court system is like. This guy is a known bandit. I would assume they go, oh, he admitted he killed someone. All right, that's an open and shut case. We don't need to interview anyone else. Why do we need to continue with this trial? He said he killed someone. There we go. We got him. Yeah. And so it's fascinating that they keep going with this. And then we hear the other versions of the story, and they also are killers. And it's like, it's such an interesting spin on events that people are so willingly able to incriminate themselves, even if by doing so, they are sort of saving face at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one thing that really hit home to me watching this most recent time is just how modern this feels, how kind of timeless it feels, especially for 1950, and for how politically charged it is. You know, if you're thinking about Japan in 1950 and probably that country's history of censorship, this is a bold swing for Kurosawa. Like, he's really saying some stuff here, and it's you know, I think brave filmmaking for the time.
Yeah, and like, we're only a few years out of World War II as well, and Japan is rebuilding itself on the international stage. it's always sort of surprising to me. Japan, more so than basically any other country, pretty much allowed its directors to kind of tell the stories they want to tell instead of trying to engage in myth building of a form of rehabilitation on their image. I think of places like obviously Germany and Russia and places like that when the wars ended, they were trying to figure out where they fit in the world. And of course, in the US and England, it was all about, being proud of your country and what can you do for your country and the sacrifices we made and all this sort of stuff. And Japan is just like, well, we all did bad things.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of what this movie is saying too. But,
Yeah. I want to get into some talk about these performances. Mifune, you think of him, you think of Kurosawa, and vice versa. They did so many films together. I don't have the list in front of me, but I think they worked together like 20 times. They often had a very symbiotic relationship, but then I also know sometimes they had a bit of a fraught relationship as well. At one point, they didn't work for quite a while, and he wasn't in any of the latter years of Kurosawa's work. So I'm remembering correctly. It's been a while since I've looked up my Mifune information.
When did he die? I wonder.
He was still around for quite a bit.
He was around for a while.
Yeah, 1997 he died. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He lived a good long life.
Mm-hmm. And he was working still into the early 90s as well.
Wow.
But, Mifune is the essence of what a Kurosawa film is, and here is no different. If I was to make a list of the greatest actors of all time, Mifune has to be, at least on the Mount Rushmore of the 4 greatest or so of all time, the way he does it. This is someone who has no pretense over making himself look bad, weak, silly, outrageous, scary, not trustworthy, any sort of negative connotation you can put onto a performance to improve it. Mifune is absolutely willing to go to that route. Like, I think of his work in Seven Samurai, where he starts out as this absolute bumbling fool that no one wants around, and then by the end he's the hero, and you're on this full journey with him. And here he's playing this bandit, so right from the get-go we know he is not a good guy, and he is fully willing to commit to these sexual assaults that he is performing and bragging about them and enjoys it. And then he's also fine being a cold-blooded killer. But then he's also has this scene where we see the version of events where he's a terrible fighter as well. So we get this epic sword fight, but then we also get this bumbling fight where literally he can't even take 2 steps without falling over his own feet. He gets his sword stuck in the sand and can't pull it out.
Yeah. Something about that fight though too is I mean, this is a testament to the filmmaking and the craft, but just how well choreographed that is. Even though it looks kind of completely chaotic and haphazard, you can tell that it has been very, very choreographed and planned out. And just the way that both he and the samurai make it look, it's just really impressive.
What are your feelings, Jeff, on Mifune's performance?
I agree. I think he's an absolute powerhouse in this. Personally, I think Mifune is one of those actors who just by being in something and being such a presence in something lifts everyone else around him up, because I think the other 2 main performances in this film aren't nearly as loud, and we'll talk about them in just a moment. But to me, those, like the quietness of those by comparison to Mifune's here, really makes them stand out. But I don't think they would stand out nearly as much without, this boisterous bandit who, I mean, it feels like Mifune just like slips into that role like it's nothing. I think I've seen him in that role before, because I think he plays a very similar role in, if I'm not mistaken, I think he plays a very similar role in Seven Samurai. Mm-hmm. And like he just feels so natural in that role. I think he's incredible here. And it's very good to put him as the bandit specifically, because the bandit story is first. And I think that he really starts this movie off with a bang.
Yeah. Anytime I watch a Mifune performance, I always wonder. I'm like, I feel like he picked an animal, and that is the characteristics that he is imbuing with this character. And watching this film, I don't know if you guys felt that way too, or if I'm jogging anything right now, but I sort of maybe feel a chimpanzee or something like that. He has this energy where he bounces around. He'll often like bugs will land on him and he'll like slap himself and then he'll like pick at it, which feels very primate like. And I would say a hallmark of every Mifune performance is the beard scratch. He always does the beard scratch.
There's one moment, it's actually right when we first get introduced to the character, when he's sitting on the ground, he's tied up. He's just looking up into the sky. He's just kind of staring at the sun. And I'm watching this and I'm like, that's such an interesting choice. Because the character, what that signifies with the character is that he's either completely uninterested in what's going on, or he is seeing something that is confusing him. And the way Toshiro Mifune plays it is, it could be anything. It could be nothing. But the fact that he made that choice is really interesting.
And I think what's really interesting too around kind of all of these performances, but specifically Mifune here, is in each of the three, I guess 4 accounts of what happens, they do have to play their characters very differently. And I think that, I mean, it's a testament to the casting and Akira Kurosawa as a director that they're able to do that very subtly, but it's also a testament to those actors because I think I think that in all of those cases, like in the case of Toshiro Mifune specifically, I want to say, weirdly enough, the Samurai's version of the story, he's not nearly as wild. And yet it's like in the Samurai's version and the Woodcutter's version, he's not nearly as wild as in the other ones, but he also doesn't feel like a completely different character. He feels like he's still playing the bandit, but it feels like everything that we know about the bandit, this is, I guess, just, for lack of a better term, it's just another perspective on the bandit. But he's able to basically put in 4 completely different performances as this character without ever seeming out of character, which I think I can't even imagine how you would pull that off because I'm not an actor, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an excellent point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he does contrast very nicely to Masayuki Mori, who plays the samurai in this film, where, it almost feels a bit more like he's playing a stock character. He's this noble samurai. He gets almost no dialogue. He talks a little bit in these flashback sequences, but the most we hear from him is when he's being conjured as a spirit. So we literally have someone else performing his words, and we get this voice modulation, so he sounds very ghostly. So it is his voice, but we don't really ever get to see much or who this character is, other than knowing that he is a samurai of some sort of stature. They comment on the quality of his bows and arrows. They all have eagle feathers in them, which I imagine must have been some sort of a status symbol for arrows. He has a very beautiful wife and a beautiful horse, so he must have some sort of wealth, the way she is dressed and all these sort of things. But we don't really learn much about him because he sits there and all of his acting is sort of done with his eyes. We see him watching, observing, reflecting what is going on, and then sort of how he interprets these different scenes from the way the interpretations are happening are all very subtle, but they're there, whether it's shame or anger or disgust or things like that. It's just small variations, but I feel like every time we get a different version of the story, we can tell that from the person telling it, the story, he is feeling differently about the interpretation of them all.
Yeah, and this is actually where I have to bring up the outrage, because I want to say Masayuki Mori is my favorite performance in this film, and what really made it click for me was, and I'm very sorry to Lawrence Harvey here, but seeing Lawrence Harvey in the outrage, who's playing a version of the same character. Now, the outrage is an American remake with a cowboy instead, so he's playing like a wealthy Southern, landowner. But Lawrence Harvey in that film plays he's also very quiet. It's a very quiet role. He's usually gagged the entire time, so he can't really say much. But what I think Masayuki Mori is so good at doing here is, as you said, he does a lot of acting with his eyes, but in each of those performances, he he feels the way the emotions he's able to convey on his face in each version of the story, are very like they're very strong emotions that come through. Specifically, I think of the wife's version of the story where you see he's got this, it almost looks like a smirk, but not quite. And it's just this, it's really chilling. It's this version of contempt that makes him, you look at him and you immediately know that he wants nothing to do with whatever he's looking at, which in this case is his wife. And again, with respect to Lawrence Harvey, the thing that made that click to me is seeing some other actor try to do that and not really pulling it off. And then going back to Masayuki Mori here, that entire sequence, he maybe in the entire sequence with his wife, he maybe says one word or something. And otherwise, it's literally just him with this blank, unfeeling, well, not unfeeling, unchanging look of contempt that looks so sinister. And he doesn't have that in any of the other versions of this story, but he manages to convey other emotions just as strongly just through the way he can look. And I think that is so impressive from Masayuki Mori, and really, I think that's what makes pieces of this film really hit the way they do. Like I said, the wife's story is so chilling just because of that.
Yeah, he knows how to modulate it in an incredibly subtle but effective way, for sure.
And I think it's a performance that probably works better on rewatches too, because it's so easy to be overshadowed by Mifune with his over-the-top antics, rolling around, the loud, boisterous nature that we get from him. Whereas here, the samurai, he is so still, and it's just so easy to overlook. And even compared to the woman that's playing his wife, she has quite a few scenes of being this overdramatic flair to her, and the fact that we automatically sympathize with her because she's the victim in this story, or at least the main victim. And it's just so easy to just skip past a quiet, subtle performance like this. And so I definitely appreciated him a lot more on this second viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's talk about Mashiko Koyo, who does play the wife in this. She has this very traditional look to her, with the shaved eyebrows and the makeup on top. She has a similar look in the movie You Get To that I've seen her play in that, where that's like a ghost story where I don't know if that actually came out after, so I wonder if she was hired based on her performance in Rashomon, because there is some similarities that I notice in her performances in both the films.
She has this really interesting just kind of energy. I don't really know any other way to describe it, but she definitely has a presence, and I think the way that her story plays out is so interesting, because she's kind of gradually coming undone, like telling the story, and she's making a big show of it, but in a way that doesn't feel out of character with that character, even though we don't really know them, to echo an earlier point you made, Jeff. Yeah, she's doing some incredible stuff.
Yeah, and I think she strikes a really good balance here, because I think that she is almost as loud and wild a performer in this movie as Toshiro Mifune. But I think that with that, you get to, you run the danger of chewing the scenery, but I think that she never quite gets there. She just, it does feel, this is a woman on the worst day of her life, whose life is completely coming apart. Mm-hmm. And it never, it never feels like a woman who's acting like it's the worst day of her life. It really does feel like when she is overacting and, being as loud as she gets, that it is coming from the place it needs to come from. It doesn't feel like a melodrama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's no, I mean, there's some desperation in it, I think, but it's for, I don't know, it's not like a cry for help. Almost, it almost doesn't seem like she's, um, you know, doing this for help. It's more to kind of be the central figure in the story, almost.
Mhm.
And I feel like she sort of has the most differences in interpretations compared to anyone else, because you look at someone like the Bandit character. He is either this disgustingly evil genius master bandit that, has a large wealth because he's so good at being a bandit and killing people and taking what he wants, or he's this idiot criminal. Either way, it's sort of still in the same vein.
Yeah.
Whereas, this wife character, she has different interpretations in terms of the way the different people are projecting themselves onto her. Is she in love with the bandit? Is she faithful to her husband? Is she ashamed? Is she aware enough of Japanese traditions and social hierarchy that she is able to pivot quick enough to save her own life? What is the correct interpretation of her character? In every story, we get different versions of it. So I think she does have the most range to work with just in the function of the story.
Yeah.
Well, I think she's also the only character where I think the range is commented on in the story, because the way that her version of events is introduced is Tajamaru describes her as fierce. Like, he'd never seen a woman so fierce. And the priest says, but when she testified, we saw nothing of that fierceness.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, that's very true. And then the last sort of main character in all of this is the woodcutter, who is ostensibly our main narrator into this story. And that's played by Takashi Shimura, who is also a huge mainstay in Kurosawa films, where if you think of a second actor after Toshiro Mifune with Akira Kurosawa, it's Takeshi Shimura, who is probably best known for being the lead in Ikaru, the old man who is dying and decides he wants to build a park for his community. But you watch any other, I think he actually did more films with Kurosawa than Mifune did. So if you watch any other Kurosawa film, you're likely to see Shimura as a sort of a secondary or background character in a lot of these films, often doing a wide range of characters as well. He's also most well known for being in Godzilla, the original version as well, which always blows my mind. The same year Godzilla and Seven Samurai came out. Like, what a 1-2 masterpiece of Japanese cinema, and it stars the same person, Takeshi Shimura.
I mean, if you look at his I've just been looking at his resume here, because he's my MVP of the movie. And somebody anytime that I'm watching one of these old Japanese movies and he shows up,
he's in everything.
Kind of know I'm in. He's in everything. He made so many movies. I mean, looking at 1964 alone, there are 11 credits here, just in one year. Yeah, but he did Godzilla movies. He's in Kaidan. He has a great moment in that film. Just a guy with so much innate, charisma is not the right word, but he has a weight,
he has a presence, yeah,
to him. He has and he's also one of those guys who you don't he it seems like maybe he started later in life, or maybe the bulk of his work started to come later in life, but he brings this wisdom. He has a tremendous ability to put sadness on his face and in his eyes, and you feel the pain behind this person so often. And I think I think the woodcutter is the kind of most morally ambiguous character, because he's constantly kind of changing his narrative with as more information is revealed, and he's the most conflicted character. And I think that's it. Sometimes it can be very overplayed, and sometimes it can be played only for sympathy. And I think the way Takashi Shimura plays this character is just so real and raw.
I think you mentioned that quote earlier. I don't understand my own soul,
Yeah,
and that really sticks with me after this movie.
Yeah, I mean he is the kind of end all be all of the picture, and even when he starts kind of at the beginning kind of starts relaying the tale, he himself doesn't really believe what he's heard. And you question whether he believes himself, whether he, is telling the truth about his own version of events. It's a tough thing to play that kind of a character who's so conflicted and who has so many things that are holding him back. It could easily go wrong, I think, and there's not a wrong choice made by this actor.
And I think like the position he's put in as an actor, like his role here is that he is, everyone else in the story has a very explicit, very obvious reason to lie about what happened. I don't think the woodcutter does as much, and yet he still lies, at least at the beginning. So we're put into this position, or he's put into this position of, he's not saving his skin or anything here, but he's still not telling the truth. At least not from the start.
Right.
Now, you had mentioned earlier, Martin, this idea of how this Rashomon effect in terms of a subgenre seems to do well with crime films. And this is one in the case where it sort of feels like with most crime movies or in real life with crime, witnesses are the least reliable people. You need evidence, and this is a story all about witnesses to an event.
Yeah.
What makes you think that this is sort of the perfect genre to explore this narrative device?
I mean, it's the game of telephone that they're all playing. I think it's just very compelling to watch 2 or 3 or even 4 diametrically opposed viewpoints attempt to they're all kind of trying to win and they're all kind of trying to win the trial or reveal that their perception of events are the correct one. And what I love about the woodcutter story is that in his version of the story, nobody wins, nobody gets what they want. And that is so applicable to life, and it's why I keep coming back to films like this. I think there are. I mean, you could talk about In the Usual Suspects as well, or there were a handful of other movies that I listed that use this framework, but there's something about being brought in. A character kind of bringing you into their world and saying, listen to this tale I have to tell you. And it draws from classical literature. I mean, as I was watching this movie, I just kept thinking like classical literature meets visual poetry, meets a courtroom drama, meets a play. You see the roots of this in classic Greek tragedies and things like that. But I think this is clearly the first kind of I think cinematic representation of it. It's certainly not the first movie to ever use an unreliable narrator, because the noirs of the 40s were doing this and everything. But it's just always compelling. You always want to get to the end of it and try and decide, well, who was right? Who did you believe?
Yeah, and to sort of echo your comment in terms of like no one really coming out ahead, other than maybe the woodcutter who does find redemption in the end. Tajomiro the Bandit, obviously, I think regardless what happened in this film, we don't find the outcome of the trial, but I think regardless, he is going to be probably arrested for some sort of murder or maybe assault on the wife. I don't know. He apparently stole the samurai sword, so they'll maybe charge him with theft or something. I don't know. Whatever it is, I imagine he's going to face some sort of legal punishment. And then we have the wife who is going to go through life probably with some sort of stigma attached to her, where she is probably never going to be able to regain her place as the wife of a samurai going forward. She's probably going to have to move to an area where no one knows her, start from scratch, all this sort of stuff, where she's not going to have that same life of luxury anymore, or the previous life that she had. So it's going to be a definite change. She's always going to have that shame and stigma sort of attached to her, unfortunately. And then, of course, the samurai himself, he's dead. Like his story is final. He can't go anywhere from there. So it's so interesting that despite the fact that we don't get a resolution to the actual court case, we sort of still know where these stories are going to go for all of these people.
Well, and I think what's kind of interesting is like by putting it on that, I don't remember. I don't know if you guys remember, but early on in the movie, and this is also in the story that this is based on, Tajomaru is actually he's a criminal that the police have been looking for a while. He's accused of the murder of 2 women from a few months before this, and like no matter what happens, he's probably dead. Like they're probably going to give him a death penalty after this.
He's going down for something, even if it's not this.
Yeah,
exactly. But like, I think that starting from that point puts all of these characters in a really interesting position, because no matter what happens, just the fact that these events occurred and that they are now in a trial having to recount them, period, all of them, their lives are all over. Like the woman, she's gonna be alive, but like you said, she's gonna have to go somewhere else where no one knows her. She's probably never gonna be married to a samurai again. She may never marry, depending on what the social norms are at the time. Tajomaru is going to die, and Takahiro is dead. Like, I think that's sort of when you start them at that point where no one can come out on top, coming out on top ends up looking different. Like, I think that's a major reason why every single one of them functionally confesses to the murder, because at least in their version of the story, they can make the murder inevitable and honorable in their own way.
Yeah, exactly. And they also have to live well, at least the woman has to live with the deception, you know. They have to live with their kind of choices that the woodcutter has to live with, you know, knowing that he could have probably helped in a way. He could have intervened, or he could have told the true events of the story earlier. And yeah, we do get this nice moment with him and the child at the end, but you know, he still has to he has to square that with himself for the rest of his life.
One of my favorite quotes that happened in the movie was, most of the time we can't even be honest with ourselves. And that sort of feels like that's what the thesis of this film is, where none of these characters can even be honest with themselves in the testimonies that they give and the way that they present themselves, that they are going to lie to themselves in order to create this world in which they exist in. And I think that's probably the truest thing that is said in this movie, because that's what we all do every day in our lives. We have to present ourselves in a way that may or may not be a lie, but may not always be true.
Yeah, and the character that we haven't talked much about him, but the character who's always saying these things is the guy that they're telling the story to. This is kind of what I meant when he's the only kind of outside line to the audience, the only kind of like objective sort of point of view. He's always telling them, you know, he's saying it's human to lie. It's at the end of it, he says, well, it seems I'm right. You know, it seems that I knew what was happening all along. There were some other quotes I had written down that he says, but yeah, he's the one who's kind of always calling attention to that, you know.
Now, before we sort of kind of finish this discussion, is there anything that we haven't hit on yet that you'd like to bring up? Jeff, I'll start with you.
Not really. I do want to briefly comment on the character you were just talking about, Martin, who is credited as the commoner. But I think that I think that like he fills such an important role in this movie, and I think that in the remakes or the like in the remakes of this movie I've seen, or the like movies that are very heavily based on this, that's the character that I think ends up standing out, often standing out a lot, if not the most, because he's the only character that, I mean, he gets to devote, whoever is playing that character gets to devote the entire play or the entire movie to just playing one character. And I think that a lot of times they really nail it. I think he really nails it in this movie. He kind of like brings in a little bit of that manic energy from Tajomaru, in that he's kind of implied to be a bandit, and he sort of feels like he could be part of that crew. But then he also, he gets to provide color commentary on everything, and is the only one of the three framing characters who isn't like somehow scared out of his mind at what he's just heard. He's just like, oh yeah, this is just another story, whatever. But he's really great in the same version of that character is really great in the Outrage. I believe he's played by Howard Da Silva in that one, or no, Edward G. Robinson plays him in that one.
Oh wow, cool.
And I think the closest version to that character in something like The Last Duel is, please correct me if you think I'm very off base, I think Ben Affleck kind of plays that character in The Last Duel.
Yeah, he sort of fills like, that role. They kind of, they sort of seem to be like kind of combining a few of the archetypes in that.
Mm-hmm. Just a character who has actually very little stake in the story, so he gets to be outside it and sort of see what's and be that judge, be that audience surrogate. And I think he is, very good in that role.
I think it's so interesting that he's called the commoner too, because he is the character who is ostensibly representing, the kind of common people of this story, of this time and place. He's the one who seems most firmly set in reality. He's the one who's building the fire when they're all sitting there together. You see him, I think he's like trying to get water for them to drink as well. Like he is, he's the guy who's kind of poking fun at them for, not really sort of looking around and seeing, the real world in front of their eyes in a way. But in a way that doesn't feel like callous or nihilistic, really. He's just sort of, presenting these ideas like, you guys, you think you're having fun with your little stories, but like, look at the world around you, kind of thing.
And I actually think maybe I was a bit presumptuous there, saying he kind of comes across as maybe he could be a bandit. Maybe. Yeah. But I think it is important that he is the commoner, where when you look at the cast list, Tajomaru is the bandit. Takahiro is the samurai. Masago is the samurai's wife. Each of these characters, and maybe this is something that we could actually go into in a lot more detail in a different episode, theoretically. But like, I think that it is important that they all sort of fill those roles. Tajomaru is a unique bandit. He's Tajomaru, but he is also the bandit. Takahiro is specifically Takahiro the samurai, but he represents the samurai class in this story. And the commoner is outside of all of that. He doesn't represent the bandit view. He doesn't represent the samurai view. He doesn't represent, I mean, for lack of a better way of putting it, the female view at this time. Like he's not, he doesn't have, there's no social ties that he has to like represent here.
Right.
Yeah, Kurosawa definitely is informing the audience of these are what the attributes and traits of these characters are. So you are going in with a bit of a stock character, and it's how he is playing with these stock characters that makes the film so interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Martin, is there anything else that you wanted to kind of touch on before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I had a few things. I do think the sound design is remarkable in this movie. We mentioned the rain at the top of it, but there are also kind of long periods of silence, and you kind of hear just rustling of wind through the trees. The deliberate kind of foregrounding and backgrounding of characters, in particular in the sort of judgment scene, that one set that you mentioned of the two or three sets that are in this film. As each character has told their version of events, they go and sit in the background while the next character comes up and presents their version of the story. And I just think that's so interesting for a couple of reasons. One is, you're calling attention to the fact that, okay, we've heard this version and we're going to hear a new version, but at the same time, you still should be thinking about the story you most recently heard.
Yeah.
Or in the case of when it's the medium who's telling the dead man's story, which also I think is just a fascinating choice and probably the coolest way to kind of get that across. Now we have to see both of the previous characters in the background and how they're, even if you watch kind of the way that some of those actors are reacting, this is another like really great performance from Takashi Shimura. I think when you see, if you're like paying attention to him in the background, how he's looking at that character, and you start to see some of the cracks in his facade. I think Kurosawa is a genius at framing. Obviously, we all know that, but the way that he's like kind of forcing you to reckon with all of these multiple points of view at the same time. Also just kind of what they're doing with the setting. The sun is shining. You can tell that the day is starting to drag on kind of towards the end of it. These people are getting tired, and yeah, there's just so much there in that one particular framing. I feel like that really, for me, this time unlocked a lot of the movie.
That's such a good call out, because I loved all the ways that they framed background characters, especially in the trial sequences. It really sort of felt like in a courtroom, someone is testifying, and you could still see the other witnesses, the lawyers, the defense, the prosecution, all that sort of stuff being in the background. But this is done just on a very minimalist scale, and it makes what ostensibly should be a very boring setup in terms of just a blank white wall behind these characters testifying into something much more dynamic and interesting.
Yes, and it's just, I mean, we've mentioned it several times, but it's just so theatrical. And this feels so much like a classical play, and he could make the choice to kind of cut to close-ups during those scenes, right? But he doesn't, and I think it's obviously deliberate, and it's, in my mind, the more interesting choice, because you're obviously your eye is drawn to the central character who's telling their version of events, but at the same time, you're allowed to just kind of sit with all of these people at the same time and sort of take in what the story is, and also just how they're framed, why they look a certain way. It's just really smart, economical filmmaking.
The last thing I'll say is this also led to one of my all-time favorite Simpsons jokes. The Homer, Marge, and the family are going to Japan, and Homer doesn't want to go, and Marge says, "But Homer, you love Japan. Remember, you love Rashomon." And his response is, "That's not how I remember it." It just one of the greatest one-line jokes.
There were so many, the Simpsons. I was listening to something recently. I think it was Blank Check, but one of them were calling attention to the fact that there's like a running series of bits on The Simpsons where Bart and his friends are going to see like art house movies.
Yeah.
And stuff. Yeah, that show is so smart.
Awesome. Well, I think this is a perfect place to wrap up our discussion on Rashomon. Otherwise, might have to bring in a new set of podcasters and get their takes on all of this.
Completely redo it.
Yeah. Martin, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a real pleasure. I know I feel like we've been circling each other's orbit for a little bit now, so it's nice to finally have you on this show to repay the favor of me being on your show, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This is a blast. I loved revisiting this movie. I've been on a Kurosawa kick lately, so I think I'm going to keep it rolling tonight with maybe Yojimbo or Senjuro, one of those.
Both excellent choices.
Yeah.
And now, if people want to find more of your work, where's the best place to do so?
I am, as you mentioned, I have a podcast called Filmsplaining with Martin Strange. That's available on all podcast platforms. I also have a YouTube channel where I do the occasional video essay as well as show off my physical media collection. Just search my name, Martin Strange. It'll come up. I'm at This Is Martin Strange on both Instagram and Threads if you want to get social about it.
Very nice. Jeff, thank you so much again for being here with me today. Where can people find more of your work, and what do you have going on in your world?
Well, I just wrapped up reviewing a lot of movies for Fantasia, which you can find on ContraZoomPod.com, and I'd like to redirect people there because once again, I'm very appreciative that you like all my reviews. I cannot always say the same, but I can say that with a lot of my Fantasia film reviews. Beyond that, I have a show called Classic Movies Live. We have a sub-series called Director Showdown, where we pit directors against each other. And we just did we just did an incredible episode that I'm very, very excited about. That if I have our release schedules right in my head, it should come out tomorrow. If you're listening to this episode on the day it came out, we talked about Apishatpong Weerasethakul versus Ava DuVernay. We did Uncle Boonmee, who can recall his past lives, versus Origin, which was a very, very good episode. So I would encourage everybody to listen to that one.
Nice. Excellent. I will make sure to link to that in the show note as well. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at ContraZoomPod. What are your thoughts on Rashomon? Leave a comment on Spotify or send us an email. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.